We apologize for interrupting your doom scrolling. Now, for some positive leftist news.
Peace, comrades. It's Lucretia McEwell. For all who don't know, I run a YouTube channel where I talk about art, subculture, and activism, and I would love for you to come join me over there. But for now, let's get started on this week's episode of PLN. A wave of student-led protests in solidarity with Palestine has swept across campuses worldwide, marking what experts call the largest student movement of the 21st century. Originating at Columbia University in the United States, where students initiated encampments in April condemning Israel's actions in Gaza, the movement has rapidly spread. Over 130 universities in the U.S. alone have hosted sit-ins and demonstrations, including prestigious institutions like Harvard and Stanford. The response from authorities has been severe, with over 2,900 arrests reported across 61 campuses, sparking international outcry over police brutality. In Canada, protests have spread to McGill University and other campuses, with students demanding divestment from Israel despite attempts to disperse them. Meanwhile, Mexico's Autonomous University of Mexico has also become a focal point for demonstrations against Israeli policies. Across Europe, from the UK, Poland, Germany, and beyond, universities have seen mass protests and police crackdowns. In the UK, Cambridge and Oxford are among the institutions facing encampments calling for divestment, while in France and Germany, authorities have forcefully disbanded protests, drawing condemnation from academics and human rights groups. In Australia, major cities like Brisbane and Melbourne have hosted rallies, echoing calls for academic boycotts of Israeli institutions. Similarly, in Japan, protests have erupted at universities, including the University of Tokyo. Universities in Egypt and Bangladesh have seen significant student mobilization, with protests near diplomatic missions amplifying demands for justice in Gaza. We reported last month on the wave of institutions responding to this pressure and divesting from Israel, showing the power of collective direct action. Many more institutions have agreed to move forward with votes on whether and how to divest, so we anticipate the number of divestments to continue growing. Amidst escalating global support for Palestine, the student-led movement continues to challenge international policies and influence public discourse on the Israeli occupation. On June 8th, over 100,000 demonstrators encircled the White House with a miles-long red line to protest the U.S. support for Israel. The symbolic red line represented their opposition to the genocide against Palestinians. The event was organized by over 200 organizations with protesters from across the country, including large groups from Florida, Detroit, and Kentucky. The demonstration was a direct response to Biden's previous statements that the invasion of Rafah by Israel would be a red line for U.S. support. Empty words that have not translated into policy changes. Later in the day, a people's court convened to symbolically try Netanyahu, Biden, and other leaders for genocide and war crimes. Brian Becker of the Answer Coalition highlighted the importance of such demonstrations, noting a shift in public perception about the Israeli occupation. We have created this consciousness. All of the groups in the movement who have been in the streets, using all kinds of tactics to show protests, to show opposition, to show struggle. People's consciousness changes when they are in struggle. When they are in struggle, they open their minds to new ideas. And that's what we're witnessing in the United States. This shift in consciousness is evident in a recent CBS News poll revealing that 61% of Americans oppose sending weapons and supplies to Israel. Among those under 30, this opposition jumps to 77%. Additionally, 49% of younger Americans believe President Biden should push for an end to Israeli military actions in Gaza, a sentiment shared by 37% of all respondents. Public opinion has shifted dramatically since October 7th, when 52% opposed sending aid to Israel. Additionally, a Gallup poll from March showed a decrease in approval for Israeli military action in Gaza, down to 36% from 50% in November 2023. By April, more Americans believe Israel has gone too far in Gaza, 32%, than those who thought Israeli actions were justified, 27%. This shift reflects the impact of the tireless Palestine solidarity movement's campaigns, which have culminated in the largest pro-Palestinian demonstrations in U.S. history. Leicester Crown Court in the UK has ruled property damage is justifiable to save Palestinian lives. Joe Irving and Farhat Ulusu, two activists from Palestine Action, were acquitted of criminal damage charges related to their 2021 protests at an Israeli weapons factory. The jury accepted the defense's argument that their actions aimed to prevent greater harm to civilians and property in Palestine. In 2021, Joe and Farhat, as well as two other activists, occupied the rooftop of UAV Tactical Systems, a Leicester-based subsidiary of Elbit Systems, Israel's largest private weapons manufacturer. The group sprayed painted slogans, applied red paint to the building's facade, and damaged a skylight to reveal a drone being manufactured inside. The occupation, which lasted 6 days, aimed to challenge Israel's military actions in Palestine. Elbit Systems claimed the action cost them £1.6 million in additional security measures. Despite this, the court found the activists' motives justifiable. This was one of the several disruptive actions by Palestine Action, known for causing significant property damage to Elbit. In May last year, Palestine Action staged another major protest at the same factory, leading to over 40 arrests, although subsequent legal actions have been dismissed. Co-founder Huda Amori emphasized the legal and moral imperative to dismantle Israel's weapons trade, stating that the jury's verdict reflected a societal preference for protecting Palestinian lives over maintaining weapons production. Since its inception in 2020, Palestine Action has focused on direct actions against Elbit Systems, achieving notable successes. In 2022, Elbit lost 2 UK defense contracts worth £280 million, partially attributed to its perceived unreliability. The group's efforts have inspired similar movements in Europe and the United States, highlighting the link between arms factories and Israeli military operations in Gaza. Palestine Action's persistent activism continues to challenge the UK's role in the global arms trade, particularly concerning its impact on Palestinians. They continue to prove that direct action gets the goods. The Indigenous people of Kaneki, also known as New Catalonia, took to the streets in an uprising against French colonial dominance, marking a pivotal moment in their struggle for self-determination. Beginning in early May, Connect pro-independence groups deployed widespread roadblocks across the main island, effectively disrupting economic activities and signaling a fierce resistance to French colonial efforts to gain control. The response from French police intensified the conflict, resulting in casualties on both sides. Reports indicate over 400 Connects have been arrested, with French authorities imposing restrictions on social media to suppress coverage of the crackdown. The uprising was triggered by changes in voting regulations aimed at solidifying Kaneki's integration into France, a move strongly opposed by the indigenous population, who constitute 40% of the island's 300,000 inhabitants. Key organizations leading the resistance include the Field Action Coordination Unit, CCAT, and the Front for the National Liberation of Socialist Kaneki, FLNKS, long-standing advocates for Kanek rights since the mid-1980s. The scale of the revolt compelled French President Emmanuel Macron to interrupt his engagements and visit Kaneki, accompanied by 3,000 additional troops to bolster French domination. Macron deferred the implementation of new voting rules pending calm, but he reinforced demands for the removal of roadblocks. Kaneki's strategic importance, particularly its substantial nickel reserves and economic potential from surrounding seas, makes it highly prized by French colonial interests in the Pacific region. Amid global movements supporting decolonization and self-determination, the Kanek uprising against French imperialism emerges as a critical front in the ongoing fight against colonial oppression worldwide. All power to the people. British Columbia has enacted groundbreaking legislation to establish a minimum wage and protections for gig workers employed through platforms such as Uber, DoorDash, Skip the Dishes, and Lyft, becoming the first province in Canada to do so. Effective September 3rd, workers using these apps must receive a minimum of $20.88 per hour from the moment they accept an assignment until its completion, termed as engaged time. In addition to minimum pay guarantees, the legislation mandates coverage under WorkSafe BC, job transparency, and ensuring full tips goes to the workers. Similar to the minimum wage, this rate will be adjusted annually to keep pace with inflation, excluding tips from customer service, and platforms must compensate for any earnings shortfall affecting workers. Janet Rutledge, Parliamentary Secretary for Labor, emphasized the necessity of these protections, citing widespread exploitation of gig workers who often end shifts with minimal earnings after deducting vehicle expenses. The decision follows consultations with gig workers across the province and discussions with platform operators, business groups, labor associations, and the public. However, billionaire corporate giants like Uber and Skip the Dishes are predictably whining, threatening increased consumer costs and decrying the regulations as government overreach. Cry about it, Uber. British Columbian Premier David Eby defended the legislation, highlighting the need to prevent workers from shouldering expenses unsupported by billion-dollar revenue-generated platforms. The implementation of these regulations marks a pivotal moment for labor rights in the gig economy. Congrats to organizers pushing for this win. Canada will now grant permanent residency to migrant care workers immediately upon arrival in the country. This crucial development marks a significant victory for the migrant workers movement, which has advocated for this change since 1979. Permanent residency status will afford caregivers better protection from abuse and exploitation, setting a precedent that could extend to other temporary foreign workers. The announcement also includes reductions in educational and language requirements. Previously, caregivers needed the Canadian equivalency of 1 year of post-secondary education and a level 5 proficiency on the Canadian language benchmarks. These have now been lowered to a high school equivalency and level 4, respectively, making it more accessible for caregivers to qualify. Minister Mark Miller, who implemented these new rules, emphasized that these reduced requirements will also apply retroactively to caregivers currently in Canada, addressing the plight of thousands who were caught in limbo under the old program. The implementation of these reforms marks a significant milestone in Canada's approach to migrant labor and underscores the power of activism and advocacy. A Florida federal court has ordered Chiquita Brands International to pay $38.3 million in damages to the families of 8 Colombian men killed by the U.S. Self-Defense Forces of Colombia. This landmark ruling holds the banana giant accountable for funding the paramilitary death squad. Plaintiffs argued that Chiquita knowingly paid $2 million to the AUC, despite being aware of the group's violent activities, which included homicides, kidnappings, extortion, torture, and disappearances. The jury accepted this argument, concluding that the funds Chiquita provided facilitated these war crimes. Marco Simmons, general counsel at Earth Rights International, praised the verdict, stating, "It sends a powerful message to corporations everywhere. Profiting from human rights abuses will not go unpunished." Simmons also commended the families for their courage in taking on a major U.S. corporation and prevailing in court. The student sit-in strike at Komunika Dormitory in Krakow has intensified following a breakdown in negotiations with the Jagiellonian University and threats to cut off electricity. The strike, which began on May 17th, protests plans to liquidate the building, potentially displacing 121 students. Organized by the Krakow Workers Initiative Youth Circle and the Student Housing Initiative, the students are now fundraising to cover essential costs, including food, batteries, and other supplies necessary to sustain the occupation. The increasing number of participants have amplified these expenses. The activists have outlined specific demands. Number 1. Immediate cessation of plans to sell the Komunika Dormitory and revocation of the 2018 Jagiellonian University Senate resolution permitting the sale of 2 buildings. Number 2. Renovation of the Komunika buildings and resumption of dormitory operations by the 2024-2025 academic year. Number 3. Immediate withdrawal of plans to sell Bursa Jagiellonska by the rector-elect. Number 4. Presentation of a project for new student housing of the Roundup campus along with secure funding. Number 5. Assurance that no participation in the sit-in strike will face legal or disciplinary actions. After 8 days of striking, they succeeded in halting the sale of the dormitory, but students have not given up as they want assurances that the building will be renovated and returned for dormitory use. The collected funds are used for basic food items, kitchen utensils, battery-powered lighting, a generator and fuel, leaflets, campaign materials, extension cords, hygiene products, cleaning supplies, and transportation. Any remaining funds will support organizations that assisted during the occupation and further actions by these workers' initiative circles. On Tuesday, the 11th of June, a federal judge ruled Florida's bans on gender-affirming healthcare for transgender individuals are unconstitutional. The decision strikes down the state's restrictions on puberty blockers and hormone therapy for minors and limits on such care for adults. The transphobic law, signed by Republican Governor Ron DeSantis in 2023, prohibited those under 18 from assessing puberty blockers or hormone therapy for gender dysphoria, and imposed additional barriers for adults seeking gender-affirming care. U.S. District Judge Robert Hinkle in Tallahassee found that these provisions violated the U.S. Constitution's equal protection guarantee, citing discriminatory intentions from some Florida legislators. Gender identity is real, Hinkle stated, emphasizing that discrimination against transgender individuals must cease. Judge Hinkle noted that medical experts and major health organizations widely recognize the banned therapies as standard care for treating gender dysphoria. Testimonies from parents and transgender adults highlighted the positive impact of such treatments on mental health and well-being. Hinkle's ruling emphasized that the law discriminated based on sex, as it allowed non-transgender individuals to receive the same treatments. He criticized the law as a political maneuver rather than a genuine healthcare regulation, underscoring that the medical community supports these treatments. Doctors in Florida who violated the ban faced up to 5 years in prison, a threat now nullified by the court's decision. Fantastic news and a welcomed win for trans rights. In a significant political shift, the ruling right-wing BJP party has failed to secure a majority in India's national elections. The results, announced on June 4th, revealed that the BJP won approximately 240 out of 543 seats in India's lower house of parliament. Despite being the largest party, the BJP will now need to rely on its coalition partners to form a government, a departure from its previous 2 terms of single-party majority. The BJP-led coalition managed to secure around 290 seats, surpassing the majority mark of 272. However, the center-left alliance, named the Indian National Democratic Inclusive Alliance, or India, also made significant gains, winning around 230 seats. Although the India alliance did not secure a majority, it claimed a moral victory, reflecting widespread discontent with the BJP's governance. Sitaram Yechuri, Marxist General Secretary of the Communist Party of India, emphasized that the results would challenge the BJP's dictatorial rule and the assault on India's secular values and institutions. The center-left opposition parties accused the BJP of eroding democracy, worsening the economy, rising unemployment, polarizing the electorate on religious lines, and demonizing minorities, particularly Muslims. They claimed the election results as a victory against hate, discrimination, and polarization, focusing on social justice and economic issues instead. Overall, the election results mark a notable shift in India's political landscape, with a more fragmented parliament and increased opportunities for opposition. Edinburgh has implemented a ban on advertising high-carbon products in council-owned spaces to bolster its decarbonization efforts. Spearheaded by the Scottish Greens, the ban covers fossil fuel-powered cars, exotic holidays, commercial flights, all SUVs, including electric ones, and cruise ships. Other high-carbon categories such as fossil fuel firms and arms manufacturers will also be excluded from sponsorship partnerships and council-owned spaces. Ad-Free Cities, the campaign group supporting the policy, highlighted the significance of reducing exposure to adverts promoting polluting products. The policy is seen as steps towards climate justice by rejecting money from fossil fuel companies and refusing to legitimize their practices. On the 1st of June, the European Cruise Activist Network, or ECAN, organized the first International Anti-Cruise Day. Using the motto, "Cruises, not here, not anywhere," several groups organized actions in harbors all across Europe. There were protests in at least 30 cities. In Kiel, in northern Germany, the Initiative Against Cruise Ships in Kiel and elsewhere staged a protest on land and water. The protest on land had about 50 attendees. It started at the central station next to the luggage point for arriving cruise passengers and ended at one of the 3 cruise ships lying in the harbor at the time. The speeches held at the protest focused on the negative effects of the cruise industry on the environment and climate, the greenwashing of the usage of highly problematic liquefied natural gas, the exploitative working conditions on board, and some ideas for a better usage of the vessels. In the water, there were 14 protesters on kayaks and 2 on a sailboat. They were followed by 6 small and 1 large police vessel, each one manned by at least 4 cops. Given this 2-to-1 cop to protester ratio, it's clear that the city is quite concerned about the safety of their beloved cruise ships. In Rostock-Warnemünde, northern Germany, the climate action group Last Generation blocked the driveway to a cruise ship terminal. The passengers had to reach the vessel by foot and the ship's departure was delayed. In Rotterdam, Netherlands, the MS Rotterdam was greeted by Extinction Rebellion protesters, holding, among others, a banner reading, "You're not welcome here." In La Ciotat, France, a local branch of Stop Cruiseries staged a public debate about the cruise industry. The event was well attended and managed to collect 1,800 additional signatures on a petition calling for more public consultation about cruise vessels arriving in the harbors. The collective Stop Cruiseries also organized actions in Marseille and Toulon. In Tarragona, Spain, the group Stop Cruises Tarragona informed cruise tourists about the negative impacts of this form of travel. In La Spezia, Italy, there was a protest in front of the city hall. They focused on informing about the risk of premature death and health damage caused by exhaust fumes of the ships, especially on the elderly and children. And in Livorno, Italy, the group Livorno Porto Pulto APS staged a die-in flash mob at the harbor. We absolutely love to see this level of coordinated direct action for the climate, and organizers are hoping that publicization of these events will encourage more people to get involved in the coming years. Comrades, if you have good news from the current month, please send your stories to mexi@protonmail.com. Thank you to Javi for the positive news jams. Thank you to Cosmo for the positive news background. Thank you to Mexi, Catherine, and Marshall for script writing and production. And thank you to Tristan for editing this video. And to me for hosting this one. If you'd like to support the show, please go to patreon.com/positiveleftistnews, or you can give us a one-time tip via PayPal. The link is in the description below. Peace out, comrades.